Hi, welcome to another edition of this video series with CLE Sports PT and Performance. I'm Carol Mack, the owner of CLE Sports PT and Performance, and we're going to talk today about polarized and pyramidal training methods. So when this is for endurance sports. So we're talking triathlons, half and full marathon running, high distance biking, swimming, ultra marathons, ultra distance events of any sort. The biggest thing to understand when we talk about how to pick a training program and how to train is that endurance sports are aerobic. You probably know this already if you're an endurance athlete, but it's really important to drive this point home when we talk about how to train aerobic sports. Needs to be in the aerobic realm. So I've got kind of just a basic kind of chart here at the bottom where we understand that things like Olympic weightlifting, swinging a baseball bat, trying to hit a home run, doing a long jump, those are anaerobic events. And we have this continuum for anaerobic. It's a whole another topic for another time, but basically where we're not using oxygen and glucose as our main fuel source. I'm sorry, we're not using oxygen as our main fuel source. We are using glucose. And moving towards distance running where the oxygen is our main source. So we need to train that system if we're going to be a successful athlete in that realm. So that being said, time spent performing endurance training is very important. Aerobic training is very important for endurance athletes to be successful. Again, this seems very simple, but if any of you have done any long distance running or events where you are training, you can understand that sometimes we are not really training in the true aerobic zone. We're kind of pushing things a little bit too hard. Maybe you go out too fast on a run that is supposed to be a truly aerobic run, and you kind of go into that, back here, this anaerobic zone where your legs are starting to burn and you're going all out and you're excessively sore the next day, and that's affecting your training for later on in the week. Aerobic training is where you're at steady state and you could go for a very long time. And that's a very important piece to whichever kind of training method you're doing. So time spent performing true aerobic training is really important. Time spent at race pace is also important though. So you need to build the amount of minutes that your body can stand, being in the aerobic zone, but also if you are aiming for a certain pace, if you're trying to qualify for the Boston Marathon, you have to run at a certain pace to do that. If you're trying to PR and get your best time, your legs need to understand what it's like to feel that pace, whether it's on the bike, whether it's on, the road, whatever that is. So how much time do you devote to each type of training? Again, as I said, if you push things a little bit too fast, you're shifting your energy system that you're using for that kind of training, and it does affect how sore you are. Too much time spent there could increase your risk for injuries. There's all kinds of other things. So this needs to be done very thoughtfully, and it's not just, going out and running at a pace that you think should be fast. So we're going to kind of talk about heart rate zones, and there's a bunch of different ways to classify this. This is from Garmin. I'm using this. This is a screenshot of a recent run that I did where it was a 5K race, where we've got zones 1, which is like a warm up, to 2, which is easy. 2 is the kind of conversational pace where, again, this is where I kind of consider this to be more of the true aerobic, 2 to 3. But when I tell people to do their easy runs, we're aiming at zone 2. This is where you can have a conversation with someone. This is where you could go for a very long time. As we start to get into zone 3, even though Garmin does kind of classify this as aerobic, this is where you start to have a little bit more effort in your runs, and it's going to take you longer to recover. So I question how much you're starting to kind of float into that anaerobic zone with that. Then zone 4 is something that we call threshold, and that's a whole other conversation for another time, but just understanding that that's more intense kind of zones of training. And then zone 5 is where you're kind of at a sprint or a maximum, or you're racing at. So there are different kinds of zones. Garmin classifies it with 5. If you use Garmin watches, I have no affiliation with them. A lot of the runners that I work with have Garmin watches. I also have one myself, so I use it for my own training. Whoop, I think, also uses zone 5. I am a Whoop affiliate. There are also, to make things easier, zone 1, 2, and 3, easy, medium, hard, which I think is is probably a more simple way of classifying this, but unfortunately, I think all of us are in these zones 1 through 5, just based on what we use to time our runs and what we use to kind of track our runs, at least the majority of the people that I work with. So types of training. There's a couple here that I want to talk about. So there's polarized, there's pyramidal, and then there's threshold. We're going to spend the majority of the time talking about polarized and pyramidal for today. Polarized is where you are on one pole or the other. You have a high amount of light training. So this is, if I'm going to skip back here so you get another visual. This is in that zone 2 easy, very, very light training. You have very little in the middle, and you have a little bit of heavy training. So we're going to skip back over here. So you see huge amount of light training, decent amount of heavy training. So you feel kind of what your legs feel like in the pace, hitting the paces that it needs to, but nothing in zone, kind of that middle zone. This is where you kind of, you'll hear people talk about these middle zones kind of as like the gray area. You're not really gaining a whole lot because you're not at race pace. So it's not like your legs are going at the speed that you want to on race day. And you're not really in the light training zone either. So you're not really building that aerobic system. Again, that middle zone is kind of where it takes a long time to recover from. Heavy takes a long time, but you've already kind of built that into your training program. The middle is kind of one of those, like, why am I so sore after a run? Probably because you pushed in, you went into that middle kind of gray area. So either going light or heavy. And that's polarized training. Pyramidal training is where you do get a little bit of training in the middle, you get some, and the breakdown is about 70% of your time is spent in that low kind of light training. Maybe 20% is in the middle and 10% is at the high. So you are getting a little bit of that middle kind of gray zone. Again, it's not a lot. The majority of your time is spent in that low intensity. Threshold training, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it, but it's out there and it's a very popular training method. So I think I need to mention it here. Threshold training is where you're doing a high amount of low and moderate intensity and very little high intensity. So the breakdown from this would be like 45% low, 35% in the middle, and 20% high. As compared to pyramidal, where you're 20% in the middle, 10% high, and polarized, where you're 0% in the middle. So just understanding different kinds of realms with this. I have read papers of people who are, there's certain kind of training camps that love doing the threshold training. Some of the elite athletes, though, will be testing their lactate. So they will be drawing blood, at certain points after workouts to understand what their lactate levels are. Not all of us have access to this, and they do that to make sure that they are in the middle, but they're not dipping into the high, that they still are not, that their lactate or their fatigue levels aren't so high that they have trouble recovering for. So it's a very, very calculated middle to have this go correctly. It's hard to kind of guess on this sometimes. As somebody who sometimes does get caught in the middle, I can speak from experience with that. So what's best here? And the answer, unfortunately, it's not as black and white. It really depends. I want to talk about, this is a paper, and the reference is there at the bottom, that came out talking about the training characteristics of world-class distance runners. If you're somebody like me who kind of nerds out on these things, you will find this paper fascinating. I highly recommend taking a look. It's open access. It's out there. It's out there on the internet. It just came out in 2022, the spring. Actually, it was published on April 1st. And if we think about Kipchoge, was one of the top probably runners of our era. Who's right now has the fastest, there's a bit of an asterisk by it, but has run the fastest full marathon time that we know. This paper talks about his training. So when you think about this, is the best of the best. When he's training for a race, so he's got two kind of blocks of training. So he has what we call a preparation phase, where it's kind of the first phase of training where you're just kind of building a base. He spends about 82% of his time in the lower zones. This paper kind of classifies it into zone 1, 2, 3. Again, I'm kind of going on a zone 1 through 5, but he spends 82% of his time in zone 1. So very, 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 very easy. About 10% of his time in zone 2 and 8% of his time in zone 3. So I guess you could kind of call that a pyramidal training, but honestly, there's really not. 10% of his time is in that middle zone, 8% is in zone 3. What he's doing is Monday, Wednesday, Friday, he is doing 2 runs a day that are very, very, very easy pace. So in that lowest zone of heart rate training. On Tuesdays, so once a week, he's doing a track session where he's going to that higher zone. So that's where you get part of the time is at 8% that he's in the highest zones. Thursdays, he's doing a long run, again, in a low intensity zone. So he's laying out a lot of miles in a low intensity. And then on Saturdays, he's doing an interval training. So he's either doing long intervals on one workout or he's doing short intervals, which would be like 1 minute repeats 25 times at his marathon pace. Or I'm sorry, 25 minutes, 25 sets of 1 minute faster than marathon pace. And then, or he's doing longer intervals where he is at marathon pace, where he's going about 10 minutes at that pace and doing 4 sets of that. So if you understand that he is running the majority of his time very, very easy. He's not trying to run all the time at the pace that he wants to run, that he needs to run his marathons at. He's doing that twice a week and not for that long of time, 25 minutes total or 40 minutes total of that. As he gets closer to race day, what he ends up doing is he actually has less total mileage per week, but he ends up spending 90% of his time. So he goes from 82% of his time in low intensity runs to 90. He actually ups it. You think it would be the opposite, where he's going to spend more time in the higher intensity, but that's actually not the case at all. He does nothing in the middle, almost nothing, and he does about 10% of his time in the higher zones. So just understanding that that's what somebody's doing who's world-class going into a race. If you versus that's somebody else who is doing a little bit of pyramidal training, a little bit of polarized training. And so just to give you an example, that sometimes there's a time and place for both. From a rehab perspective, with the runners that I work with, I will say that there is a time of everybody responds to training differently. You may respond to training differently depending on what's best for you. Sometimes it matters what's going on kind of in life outside of training too, in terms of measuring training load and what you can take in a certain point. There's another talk on my YouTube channel about that. So I recommend you check that out. But just understanding that there's some variability in here, and you really kind of need to be thoughtful and scientific about how you're picking what you need to be doing. Just going out and just running and kind of getting caught in the middle zone, just because you went out too fast for a long run, really isn't going to do a whole lot of good. Really, the top athletes in the world know how to consistently train easy, and they do it very, very well. And that's how they build their aerobic capacity. And that's what makes them successful runners. They train hard when it matters. There's really a cap on how much we can do in terms of that high intensity work a week. I was listening to a podcast and I heard the best quote about if Kipchoge can't handle more than 2 days a week, not say that he can't, if he's not doing, he probably can handle more than that, but he's not doing more than 2 days a week of high intensity. He's doing a track workout 1 day a week. He's doing an interval run the other day a week. Why would any of us be able to handle more than that? Why would we be training more than our light, more than a low intensity on the other days? What ends up happening is if you do that, let's say I go out on my run that's supposed to be easy and I take it a little bit too hard. My legs are too sore. I'm supposed to have a track workout the next day. I'm going to go into that track workout and my legs are tired. I'm not going to hit the paces that I need. So number one, that's almost a wasted workout because I need to practice running fast and I'm not going to be able to get there. Number two, that's way too much load. When we talk about monitoring load for our athletes, it's way too much load than we need. And number three, that puts me at a risk for injury. Or burning out, or just not being able to train the way that I need to if I have a true goal. If you do the hard stuff too hard, you're not going to be able to do. If you do the easy stuff too hard, you're not going to be able to be successful with the long runs. I totally just botched that. If I do the hard stuff too hard, I'm not going to be able to hit the easy runs that I need to. I'm going to be too tired to do that. Conversely, if I do the hard runs, if I'm too tired to do the hard runs, it's a waste of a workout. I'm not going to be able to hit the paces that I need to. I'm going to say that one more time just because I've completely reversed it a bunch of times. So if I go too hard on the track workouts and the interval workouts and all of those things, I'm going to completely burn my legs out, not be able to do my long, easy runs. If I go too hard on the long, easy runs and don't hit that low, that low intensity that I need to, and I'm tired the next day, my track workout is going to be crap. So it's this balance where we need to understand that there's a goal for each workout, and just getting caught in like, oh, I went out, faster than I needed to go is probably not going to do us very well in the long run. Basically run easy on the days you're supposed to and hard when it matters. And if you're going to follow a certain plan, so if you are following a pyramidal plan where you are having a little bit of time in that middle realm, it needs to be done thoughtfully, and you need to account for the recovery time in between. If you're doing the polarized runs where you're running either very hard and fast or very easy, making sure that you're sticking to that, because sometimes it's very hard to do that. If anybody's tried to do that, the low intensity runs, it's very easy to get caught up in going faster. Feel free, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me, and thank you for tuning in again on this Thursday or whenever you're watching it. Take care.